right, so we left off talking about this chart and how important this chart is for creating or completing your assignment and studying for the exam and all of that. But let's move on. This here is an example of a linear periodization model, and this is from the book, so I just kind of copied it and put it in here. We have our scenario. We have a female college basketball center, resistance training since high school. She's skilled. Beginning of the preseason. So this just looks at a progression of training throughout all 4 seasons. So this actually starts with the preseason. We'll end with the off season. So we have preseason, which is our first transition. This is characterized by the strength power phase. So we have increased intensity of sport-specific training, sport-specific muscle groups. So we see strength training 3 times per week, focus on strength and power, but we're also working on plyometric and anaerobic training. Now we've transitioned to end season, so competition. The goal is maintenance of strength and power, but basketball players also need flexibility and anaerobic conditioning, so we're still going to train those areas. Resistance training is less now. We have 30 minutes, 1 to 3 times per week. So this is going to be of pretty high intensity. You can see that's also alternated with plyometric training. We really are spending most of our time on skill and strategy development, so like technical training. Now we move to the postseason. We see there's no formal structured workouts. We're doing recreational activities, low intensity, no volume. If we are lifting weights, it's non-specific and it's kind of just whatever feels right for the athlete. And then now back into the off season. Now we're getting ready for our next competitive season or the next macro cycle. So we would do testing, so like 1RM testing at the beginning and end of the off season. Resistance training is of our highest priority here. 4 times per week. It says we're using split routines and then doing a lot of aerobic endurance training to build back up that base of fitness. So yeah, that is our linear model. Watch the video under assignments about how to complete the assignment if you're interested in using the linear model to do that. But we're going to move on to the nonlinear model. So the nonlinear model, also called undulating, this is also an option to use for assignment 4. So you can use a nonlinear model as well. So what does what does undulating mean? The word itself means having a smoothly rising or falling outline, or to form in waves. So wave-like formation is what undulating means. We see it was created or originated in the 70s. We see West German strength researcher and Canadian strength coach. So what is this? So it involves large fluctuations in each microcycle. If you remember a microcycle, that's just 1 week of training. So you're performing workouts with different volumes and intensities. Every single time you train, it's going to look a little different. We see an example down here. We see session 1. We're doing cleans, back squat, and RDL. If you look at the volume and the intensity, I would normally ask you, what do you think the focus of session 1 is? It's going to be a strength power focus. So we see we've got cleans, but then we also have back squat and RDL. The reps are pretty low, but that intensity is not extremely high. So strength power focus possibly. Session 2, we also have power. We have hang cleans. We have front squat and deadlift though. So despite the hang clean, our front squat and deadlift, we see kind of an endurance focus there. So with that 12 reps. And then session 3, clean pulls, back squat, legs press. We have our 8 reps. That's probably going to be more of a hypertrophy focus. So the point of this is just look at the daily, weekly, bi-weekly changes in training volume. There's no set pattern of training here. So it's just kind of whatever goal wants to be emphasized during that session. So this example here, this is an example of linear. And then the bottom 2 will be nonlinear. So an example of linear looks at performing the same volume on all 3 days of training. With the same volume, we can have a different intensity. So day 1, we're doing 6 RMs basically. So we have 6 reps at 85%. Day 2, that volume is going to stay the same, but the intensity is reduced. And then day 3, it's reduced even more. So that's one example of linear. Again, linear can be different than what you see there. That's just showing you kind of maybe what it could look like. But undulating here at the bottom is looking at RM training zones. So let's say we're training Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So Tuesday, I've got 6 sets at a 6 RM. So strength focus, probably about 85%. Thursday, 3 sets at a 10 RM. So that's going to be 75%. And that's going to be a hypertrophy focus. And then Saturday, we have 3 sets at a 3 RM. So that could be a heavy strength or a power focus. 3 RM could be that 93% for strength focus. So with the training zones, they're not performed sequentially. They don't use week-long microcycles with the same volume or intensity. You can kind of see down there, it's just changed up based on the day of training. Here's another example of undulating nonlinear, where we have just different workouts, but they're described descriptively. So we have a light endurance day, could be 12 reps at 65%. We have a moderate hypertrophy, could be 8 to 10 reps at 70%. We have a heavy strength day, could be 2 to 3 reps at 90 to 95%. We have an explosive power day, and then our active rest day. So normally a question I would ask to the students is, what is the benefit of nonlinear undulating? So why would somebody want to do a nonlinear model compared to a linear? And I would let y'all talk about it for a second and talk about what is the benefit of the 2 bottom training focuses that you see. So some of our answers for that question would be, we have more frequent changes, which is highly conductive to strength gains. Another is just talking about variation. It keeps the body guessing what type of training is next. Provides a greater stimulus to the neuromuscular system. So we are exposed to different volumes and intensities on a weekly basis. So it allows the body to adapt better to all those different styles of training. We can maximize performance gains to a greater extent with variations in volume and intensity by changing the training focus. These unpredictable loads lead to better neuromuscular adaptation. And then we can train all aspects of muscular fitness in a shorter time frame. So there are a lot of benefits to doing undulating. We'll compare and contrast in just a second. But let's look at another example. Even though undulating nonlinear is considered kind of like random training, we can still have a focus. So we see at the top, we have weeks, so 1 to 12 weeks, and we have looking at day 1, day 2, and day 3 of those weeks. So we have endurance focus up here. We have our key, and you can see that L and very L, we're looking at very light to light. That's mainly the type of training that we're doing, but it doesn't mean we can't have a moderate intensity day or a high day or even a very high day. We can still have a focus, but do multiple different types of training goals. Down here we have a strength focus. We're mainly doing heavy days and very heavy days, but there's a lot of power, and there's some moderate days, and there's some light days in there as well. Here's one more example. We have over here, we have mesocycles. So we have mesocycles that are each 4 weeks long, and this is just looking at one microcycle within the mesocycle. So let's say for 4 weeks, we're doing 3 sets of 10 to 12 RM. And then during mesocycle 2, for 4 more weeks, we've now decreased the volume a little bit to doing 8 to 10 reps, or RMs, and then mesocycle 3, so looking at this one here, we're basically getting heavier. So we start with a higher volume, probably a lower intensity, and then we're slowly decreasing the volume and increasing the intensity as we work up to the last mesocycle, where we're training with really high RM zones, and then we move into an active rest period. So this is kind of what your linear model looks like. Nonlinear though, nonlinear would be, this is just looking at 2 different weeks of training. We have endurance, and then hypertrophy, and then strength, all in one single week. And then the next week, we start with a really heavy power day, possibly, and then we move to a power plyometrics, and then we move back to an endurance, and then we have an active rest period. So you probably get it at this point. Linear is very structured. We have a structured plan for 4 weeks at a time. Just keep in mind there are going to be slight fluctuations at the microcycle level. So with intensity is probably where the fluctuations will occur. And then undulating is basically just kind of, I hate to say the word, it's just completely random, but it's just different focuses of training throughout a given week. So now let's compare and contrast. So this slide here will just compare the two across each way. All right, so linear is going to be easier for untrained because it's basically easier to tolerate those fluctuations in training. You can slowly adapt to the training stress, where undulating is better for our trained athletes who have a smaller adaptive window and require greater variation, so more large fluctuations in training. With those increase in volume and intensity, it allows for continued adaptation to a given stimulus. So very little variation. Compared over here, that blank's going to be variety. So we have more variety with undulating. Hold on just a second. Huh. More variety. So more variety in training. Next one with our linear, we have very easy progression. So we have a progression in intensity and a decrease in volume. So nice, easy progression throughout each phase. But nonlinear actually results in better neuromuscular adaptations. So loads are unpredictable, but there's still a focus on a single goal at a time. So we have unpredictable loading schemes, but we still have a definite goal each day we train. This helps avoid detraining effects due to appropriate fluctuations, making sure we're always using stimulating loads. There's a definite peaking phase in linear. If you follow those patterns, you're most likely to hit a peak at the very end. But for undulating, we can have longer peaking, or we can have multiple peaks, so we can hit another peak within the phase. What's next? So next, the definite peaking phase is followed by an active rest, where with undulating, you can kind of schedule your active rest whenever is appropriate for the athlete. Difference in fatigue. So traditional linear has greater accumulated neural fatigue, which is also called central fatigue. It's just reduced neural drive to the muscle, decreased force output caused by the ever-increasing intensity that occurs throughout the seasons. Where peripheral fatigue is the inability of the body to supply sufficient energy for contraction of muscle. So it's basically outstripped rate of ATP replenishment and the accumulation hypothesis. So depletion, accumulation of fuel sources. And then peripheral fatigue is also just like the wear and tear of the stretch shortening cycle. So breakdown of muscle tissue. And the greater peripheral fatigue also results in increased injury risk and overtraining. This is due to the overall greater load volumes of the training that's been kind of accumulated. So basically just comparisons here. There's not one good or bad model. They're both very beneficial. It just depends on who your athlete is. Again, if you have a relatively young, unseasoned athlete, linear is going to be best for them to adapt to, or just a basic recreational athlete. Whereas non-linear undulating is sometimes better for trained athletes because trained athletes need a greater stimuli. They need to be exposed to multiple different types of training in a given period, so it just allows for greater adaptations to occur, and it reduces accommodation. So, but you can choose either one to do your assignment over. This slide here in class, we were going to look at some research, but obviously we're not really going to do that. So I'll just tell you a little bit about these studies. This one looked at compared linear and nonlinear between freshman football players. So what do you think the results would be? The linear worked better for the freshman football players. They're young, relatively unseasoned or untrained, unseasoned. So they kind of just responded better to the progression and intensity. Next one looked at linear versus nonlinear for just improvements in performance. Both the programs had equated volume and intensity for strength. They found that both were effective at improving strength. Last one, nonlinear versus linear, looked at hypertrophy and strength. This one actually found that nonlinear had better results. So there was greater muscle thickness and greater 1RMs with the nonlinear approach. But like I said, there's no good or bad model. They're both effective. It just depends on what type of training you're interested in doing. Another thing to keep in mind is the way to choose a model, linear and nonlinear, it's going to be best decided by like, what do you actually want to spend your time working on? Like, do you know how to create training programs? If you do, then do whichever one works best for you. But if you're unfamiliar with designing training programs, I may do the linear model if I were you, because the chart basically tells you exactly how to follow it. So if you look at the chart, it tells you basically everything that you have to do in each phase. Versus if you're really comfortable designing your own training programs, then you do whichever one works best for you. So here's another model, but this model is actually not an option to choose for your assignment because it's more of a hypothetical model. So what is this model here? It's flexible, unplanned, nonlinear. As you read it, the workout is determined when the athlete reports to the weight room. So the workout is decided based on conducting a fatigue analysis. So fatigue analysis would just be testing, and I guess that's what this one says here, test for physical performance, monitor how they respond to a warm-up set compared to prior efforts. You can just like ask them how they feel. You can give them a little survey to fill out about like how much sleep they've had, their nutrition, their hydration level, their energy level, just kind of conducting how they feel. And based on all those answers, figuring out how physically fatigued they are, mentally, whatever it is, that's how you decide the workout. So based on the results of 1, 2, and 3, you would choose the workouts that you had planned. So you already have to have like a workout design. So like workout A, they're fresh, they're ready to go. Workout B, they're moderately tired. Workout C, they're pretty tired. We should really reduce the intensity. Or option D, which would be no workout at all. So yeah, there's just different ways to train, and this one is just really good because individualized workouts are the gold standard of training. The gold standard just means the best in its class. So best in its class for training, if we can customize a workout for every single person, we're going to have better results. But that's really hard when we have really large teams. So really large teams, you can't ask every single person on that team how they feel and give every single person a different workout. Large teams usually do workouts. They usually have a very similar plan with each other. But smaller teams, it's really easy to customize workouts for each person. We're going to see the best results that way.